Companies are constantly expanding their new horizons into new territories, whether it be local, national, or global. One of their main focuses is to find ways to enhance the diversity amongst their employees. To augment results, it is imperative that minorities feel included and avoid solely sticking with one another when operating in groups. There are 5 key elements that should be understood before any decisions are made based on diversity in group work. These include why minorities stick together, disadvantages of minorities secluding themselves, how managers can encourage diverse interactions, laws in the workplace relating to minorities and their effectiveness, and benefits for minorities socializing with others in the workplace. By stressing the significance of diversity, businesses can synthesize strategies where all of the diverse staff are needed and involved. Understanding why minorities stick together in the workplace is the first step in the strategic decision-making processes of upper-level management regarding diversity. These decisions have no rules to guide their choices, so having knowledge on educational disadvantages, cultural barriers in structured corporate hierarchies, and social psychology group theories prove beneficial in improving the overall corporate culture. The educational hardships that some minorities face in adolescence impacts them all the way into adulthood. According to Bowie, research from the Council of Great City Schools states that the ability of Black 4th grade boys to read at a competent level is as low as 12%. And based on these statistics, it's not hard to imagine that their ability to attend and be successful in university is any more favorable at a 43% college graduation rate. These consistent educational disadvantages that some minorities face follow them all the way into the workplace. Minorities are still underrepresented at management and leadership levels and overrepresented at low-wage work. According to Bowie, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that in the early 2000s, the labor force participation of African Americans was 62% and 70% for Latinos. Those who make it to higher positions may face barriers that puts their chances of further growth at their company in jeopardy. In Uslander's academic article, they state that linguistic conflict arises when there is a clear language and cultural barrier present between two people or two groups. It should not be expected that these parties will form a close bond outside of the group due to their innate behavior that makes it more difficult to trust others that are not similar to themselves. According to Bosworth, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that in 2011, white people made up more than 81% of the workforce. The research presented by Holland supports this statistic by showing that this can create an unsettling status hierarchy in groups, which may cause minorities to find acceptance and comfort in those demographically similar to themselves. The optimal distinctiveness theory, or ODT, was created by the distinguished social psychologist Marilyn Brewer. It explains there's a fundamental need in humans to be unique, yet still seek acceptance and find similarities with others. There's also the inclusion framework, presented by Shore, Randall, Chung, Dean, Earhart, and Singh. If minorities and groups feel a low sense of uniqueness and a high sense of belongingness, the worker is subject to assimilation. This is when the individual feels accepted into the group, but they feel pressured to conform to the dominant norms within the organization. This can lead them to mentally subdue all of their idiosyncratic qualities that make them unique. When a group member feels their individuality and sense of belonging fading away in the group, ODT studies report that the individual will make any sort of accommodations they need to their behavior to get approval from others. And this shift in balance, unfortunately, can include caricaturing traits that those in their minority group are perceived to have. This is known as differentiation, where emphasis is placed on the uniqueness of the individual, but they still feel a low sense of belongingness in the group they're in. An example given by Shore et al. Is a sole Asian American is working in a team of Caucasians, but her need for belongingness may be activated when her ideas are publicly rejected and she associates that rejection with her race. This promotes an idea of tokenism, where minorities feel they're placed in a group because of their race, culture, or sexual identity, rather than their unique skill set and hard work that they've done to get there. The takeaway from understanding all this is why minorities feel inclined stick together is creating a diverse group dynamic that invites members to feel inclusion and be, quote, sure at all, as an insider, and also encouraged to retain uniqueness within the group. Next, Jasmine will discuss the issues associated with minorities sticking together in the workplace.
At some point in our lives, we will work with someone from a different culture. Some view it as being beneficial and some not. It is important to know the importance of diversity in the workplace because there are disadvantages to be aware of that would help build and maintain a business. One disadvantage to be aware of is an increase in the cost of training. Training consists of seminars, programs, and lectures given to all levels of employees. With this, employees are taught how to accept personalities, thoughts, and ideas of others. Henry Evans stated in the African American academic journals that the training proved to help any manners of animosity and how to overcome them in a civil way. Another disadvantage are the conflicts that come up. For example, a conflict may occur when two don't see eye to eye on a project or a task at hand. Professor White of the Louisiana State University wrote in a journal, in regard to the diversity, conflicts arise largely due to ignorance. Discriminating feelings can cause a lack of acceptance. With this, it can produce ethnocentrism, stereotyping, and culture clashes. If management cannot resolve these issues, the company will suffer tremendously. From my own experience, I worked with someone who was from the same culture as me, someone who even went to the same church. And we would think that being from the same culture, you would have a sense of unity. But it never turned out that way. He never appreciated anything that I have done, and it caused me to leave the business, which leads into the next disadvantage. Increased labor turnover is another disadvantage of having diversity in the workplace. Defined by Tudor U, labor turnover is a movement of employees in and out of a business. The turnover rate, according to Henry Evans, for both African Americans and women have increased drastically in the past year. African American had an increase by 40%, while women's rate was 2 times higher than the males. Knowing the importance of diversity in the workplace based on the disadvantages can lead to many successes. Next, Taylor will talk about how managers can encourage diverse interactions.
Now that we see why minorities stick together in the workplace and why it's a bad thing, it's important to know what management can do to encourage diverse interactions. But first, it's important to point out what makes minorities not want to stay with the company. The Clute Institute's Journal of Diversity Management blames it on the chilly climate of some workplaces. The things that cause this chilly climate are people feel that their color matters more than their credibility, that there are too few minorities in the workplace, that they're not receiving support or validation for research on minority issues, and they feel as though they're being expected to handle all minority affairs just because of their skin color. So what can management do to help? I interviewed Leo A. Rawl, who works in the Healthy Living Medical Supply, and he said that the issue with diversity training is that it seems as though the newer employees get different training than the older employees. So it seems as though when people make like an inappropriate joke or something, it's because they didn't get an older employee, so they didn't get the same training. And he feels as though there's not enough consequence involved from an HR perspective. Some other things that management can do. The Wall Street Journal has a guide on diversity training implementation. They said the most important thing is that current employees know that you are focusing on credentials of employees and not on quotas. They also say that it's important to address any cultural issues that the future employee might have during the recruiting stage and not during, not like while they're working there. Attack it head on. The Journal of Diversity Management says not to force the current culture of the workplace on any minorities, but instead to encourage them to embrace their current identity. And then there's also a book called Successful Diversity Management Initiatives, a blueprint for planning and implementation. They have a web on certain things that companies need to have in order to be a successful multicultural organization. It's important that the company has multicultural management competencies. that they have a multicultural ambiance, that they have cross-cultural flexibility, awareness, respect, and adaptation. They also have a guideline for training programs. It's 10 steps, and I'll go over those now. The first step is to just develop the training plan, what you want to do, what you want to achieve, and then position the plan as a strategy and not an initiative. So you want to communicate to employees that this is a long-term effect, not a short-term one. You need to clarify what programs belong to what audience. So perhaps there's a different program for managers as opposed to general employees. You need to make sure that the training is consistent with the needs and goals of the company itself. You need to recognize the impacts of training, and you need to have a measurable way of doing that before you implement the training program. What do you want this program to achieve? How are you going to measure that in the long term? What are you going to do if it doesn't work? And then you pilot test the program with a small group of employees. And then step 7 is where you use the strategy that you developed in step 5 to measure the impacts of the training program. And then you need to make sure there's a detailed communication process throughout this whole thing, that employees know what their expectations are and that they're following them. And then you need to select facilitators based on a predetermined criteria. So it's important that you're hiring people that are going to communicate what you want your plan to address, and that they're going to do it in an effective way. And then the final step is to make sure that employees are considering this a learning process and not an event. So it's not just something that they have to show up for 2 hours on a Tuesday and just watch. It's something that they need to listen to, absorb all of the information, and then implement it into their daily work lives. This should be successful for most companies during their diversity training initiatives, and then it should lead to more diverse interactions during the workplace. Next, Maggie is going to talk about the legal aspects of minorities in the workplace and then their effects.
Employment diversity is a topic that is too often tied into another topic, employment discrimination in the workplace. And though there are many laws, acts, and regulations in place to prevent these cases, discrimination is still a very prevalent issue in our judicial system today. Enhancing diversity in the workplace means protecting minorities, and this means decreasing, if not eliminating, of all employment discrimination. There are government organizations such as the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that are set in place to combat these issues. And though statutes may vary from state to state, it has helped make great strides to protect minorities in the workplace in the U.S. Starting with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, this is the first great stride taken to prevent minorities and their discrimination in the workplace in the United States. The EEOC works to regulate and establish these guidelines to follow, and they help regulate any employment law cases filed under the Civil Rights Act. They also help cover topics such as the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which ensures that men and women get paid an equal rate for equal jobs, and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, which helps prevent employment discrimination against any persons with disabilities. And their code of regulations can be found at the eeoc.gov. Application of these laws is explained very well by Professor of Law Shannon Johnson in her book, The Federal Guide to Employment for Small Businesses. Within, she says that laws are not one size fits all, meaning that there are factors that cover both employee and employer in employment law cases. Like I said before, laws do vary from state to state, and in Lee Hornberger's article, Employment Discrimination Law in Michigan, found in the Michigan Bar Journal, he does explain our statute called the Michigan Elliott-Larsen Act, filed under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Michigan Elliott-Larsen states that no person shall be discriminated against based on height, weight, age, race, sex, national origin, marital status, or familial status. And they also pay special attention to retaliation, meaning when an employee files a case against an employer, the EEOC and the Michigan Elliott-Larsen Act prevent the employee from being further discriminated against by the employer. Now, these cases can both be costly in a monetary value and time value. EEOC reports that the average court case costs about $40,000 for the employer. It can last up to a year, and in 67% of cases, the plaintiff wins. A recent example of this can be found at NewJersey.gov, where a New Jersey employee for the school district was rewarded $45,000 in retributions after she was wrongfully terminated from taking a leave of absence for a death in the family. So as we can see here, discrimination is a very broad topic, and you have to work to cover all grounds. There's also ethical responsibilities, as Taylor had mentioned, with proper training in the workplace and diversity training. And now the effectiveness of these laws, it's still quite an issue in our judicial system today, as mentioned before. The NLCATP reports that over 37% of cases filed in the United States are related to specifically racial discrimination. And like I said before, the plaintiff often does win in these cases, making it quite costly for the employer. With proper training and enforcement, more diversity can be enhanced and ensured for minorities in the workplace. And now Lindsay will carry on with more advantages to diversity in the workplace and conclude.
When diverse interactions are encouraged by management and laws, there are many benefits to employers and employees alike. When employers encourage diverse interactions, everyone benefits. Rizzi, Fields, Snyderman, and Egan published that one of the benefits of diverse interactions is more innovation. When minds from different cultures come together, it creates an environment that allows for individuals to express their creative minds and provide different perspectives. Rizzi et al. Says that this can lead to new ideas, services, and products, and this innovation can help companies strengthen their profitability. Betty discussed that diversity removes mental blocks in the organization and encourages receptivity to new and unfamiliar ideas. This supports that diversity is important because it helps employees learn to accept differences and be open to suggestions from those who think differently. This can further even more innovation. And an additional benefit to minorities interacting with non-minorities is an increase in employee happiness. Hewlett, Marshall, and Sherbin stated that without diverse leadership, women are 20% less likely than straight men to win endorsement for their ideas. People of color are 24% less likely, and LGBTs are 21% less likely. This statistic shows how important it is for minorities to interact amongst non-minorities. Minorities should aspire to be promoted to a leadership position not only because it will be beneficial for their fulfillment, but when there are more minorities in leadership positions, minorities in lower positions are more likely to be recognized in the workplace for their achievements. This leads to happier and more fulfilled employees. In the publication by Rizzi et al., Debbie Story from AT&T said that when you create an environment where people feel they can come together and bring their own views and feel respected, competitively, your company will do so much better. The acceptance that is created when minorities feel welcome to contribute amongst non-minorities benefits all, and in sum from what Shore, Randall, Chung, Dean, and Earhart said, this inclusion can help minorities and non-minorities understand each other better and be more effective in teams. There are many challenges that can arise when non-minorities hold stereotypes about minorities within organizations. Thomas Skovic, Devi, and Warren said that there is increasing evidence that even deep-seated stereotypes and unconscious biases can be ended through both education and exposure to minorities who don't fit common stereotypes. Thus, it is important for minorities and non-minorities to work together in order to be exposed to one another and minimize stereotypes and biases that may be held. When stereotypes are minimized, minorities and non-minorities are more willing to work together, and it can increase productivity and minimize group conflict. I can personally attest to how being exposed to minorities can decrease stereotypes held against them and benefit the entire group. Once I was involved in a group project that consisted of 3 white students and 4 Brazilian students. The white students stereotyped the Brazilian students as loud and obnoxious, and this made them not want to work with them from the beginning. However, the Brazilian students showed that they were very capable
of being serious and that their outgoingness would be useful during our final presentation. Once the white students were exposed to the side of the Brazilians, they quickly became more willing to work with them, and our productivity increased as a whole. We ultimately received an A on that project and got compliments on how much charisma was present during the presentation. And that wouldn't have been possible without seeing past the stereotypes and working as a team. Minorities should not stick together in the workplace. When minorities seclude themselves, it does not benefit anyone. Organizations should help encourage these diverse interactions because they are not only important for employees, but for organizations as a whole. An organization that notices a divide between minorities and non-minorities working together should take immediate action to implement a plan that will increase diverse relations. The benefits to individual employees as well as organizations are innumerable.